Great. Okay, so welcome back. In this next video in the series, we're going to look at the primary hormones and neurotransmitters that influence our behavior. Now, there are basically two primary neurotransmitters or chemical groups that are produced in the brain, and the more of any particular one of these that your brain produces, the more dominantly we exhibit certain types of behaviors. Taking the first chemical, serotonin, we have scientifically been able to determine that the more serotonin that we produce naturally in our brains, the more we tend to exhibit the types of behaviors that we see here. So high serotonin producers typically are more conscientious, conventional, cautious, not fearful, more detail-oriented, persistent, precise, orderly, careful planners. They can be very, very calm. So some of you may well recognize the chemical name serotonin as well, as it's often used by pharmaceutical companies in the manufacture of drugs that help with sufferers of depression or anxiety. Another way of introducing more serotonin into your brain is to do exercise, as this is known to increase your serotonin levels naturally. So for those of you who regularly go down to the gym, you will be fairly familiar with that great feeling you get of positivity after a good workout. Well, this is your serotonin high kicking in, basically. Serotonin also counteracts the effects of the stress hormone. And so all round, there are lots of positive benefits of this chemical. Now let's take a look at the effect that people who produce higher levels of dopamine. As you can see, dopamine drives behaviors that are more associated with the need for novelty and reward. The classic behavior of high dopamine producers are being more unconventional, uninhibited, optimistic, mentally flexible, spontaneous, creative, impulsive, curious, opportunistic, energetic, and at times a little bit gung-ho or reckless. Now, to augment these chemicals, we also produce hormones, and the two primary hormones we produce are testosterone and estrogen. If we look at those people who produce higher levels of testosterone, then we can see some examples of the types of behavior that we would expect to see here are more about being competitive, independent, forthright, practical, aggressive, emotionally contained, decisive, direct, tough-minded, daring and focused. And then finally we look at the other hormone, estrogen, and as you can see, our estrogen production influences behaviours centred around our empathy seeking, and specifically types of behaviours that you would expect to see here are linked to us exhibiting behaviours such as being more caring, nurturing, being sympathetic, idealistic, agreeable, supportive, sensitive, kind-hearted, charitable, tolerant, unassuming and sentimental. So in this video, we're now going to build out your understanding of the different behaviours that exist and how they relate to our physical brain. You may have heard people in conversation at some point mentioning that they're left brain thinkers or right brain thinkers, and so I'm now going to explain the context for where this comes from and also how it's important for you to connect your knowledge of the way your brain works to how you might, for example, start planning your best next career move. So our physical brain is basically two hemispheres with a very small bridge that connects each side, which is called the corpus callosum. If we want to describe the two sides of our brain, we would say the right side of the brain is the creative, fertile side of our brain and behaviour, and the left side is the structure and process, almost robotic side of the brain and our behaviour. Each hemisphere, or half of the brain, comprises two quadrants, and so our brains are in four sections: front left, front right, rear left, and rear right. Research has now pretty conclusively determined that the right hemisphere is particularly adept at processing new and novel information, and the left hemisphere is particularly adept at processing routine, familiar information. The right hemisphere is predominantly hardwired for empathy. The left hemisphere is predominantly hardwired for systemizing. Taking things a stage further, the following descriptions of behavior are linked to the right side of the brain. Things like geometry, music, faces, sense of direction, reading expression, mental rotation of shapes, whereas the left side of our brains is more about letters and words, multiplication, reading, writing, sequential analysis and structure. Building on this, we also know that each quadrant of our brain drives these primary types of activity. So the green quadrant is associated with being more visionary and creative. The blue quadrant is dominance and more about supporting and protecting. The red quadrant of the brain is about achieving and competing, and the gold quadrant of the brain is about being organized and analytical. And so let's just do a quick recap here on what we've learned so far about the biology of the brain. We all normally produce the two primary chemical groups and hormones all of the time in our brains. But as you would expect, in the same way that we all look differently and have our own unique DNA, so the amount or level of production of these chemicals and hormones is different. When we add to this the two other drivers of our behavior, our developed behavior and our situational behavior, we have a really good template for analyzing who we are in behavior terms. For example, if you take the list of different behaviors shown here, you may well be able to identify personally with some of these types of behaviors. For example, you may well say to yourself that you tend to get very excited when new versions of a computer game are released or when the latest smartphone is available for sale. And you also like to do things spontaneously and on the spur of the moment. And these are classic behaviors driven by our levels of dopamine. In contrast, you may describe yourself as someone who is very calm and controlled, who prefers to plan things very carefully and prides yourself with a tidy and well-organized office station or bedroom. These are behaviors that come from your serotonin production. Now, a key point here is that you may have noticed this already, is that serotonin and dopamine influence almost opposite types of behavior, which tends to mean that one of these will be more dominant in you than the other. And the same applies to testosterone and estrogen. Now, most people should be able to identify with many of the described behaviors that you see here. And you could quickly do the exercise to list the behaviors that you feel are much more dominant from these lists, and then determine your primary colors. Serotonin is gold, dopamine green, estrogen blue, testosterone red. We often have two dominant behavioral quadrants, and so have a little think about your two most dominant colors. Now, with this basic grasp of our most dominant types of behaviors, we can now go on to understand more about what our key behaviors are and how they may be used to or matched against our suitability to perform different types of work. We can also use this information to learn about observing the behaviors of others, being able to map them against these behavior profiles, and then start to understand how we can communicate more effectively with people who act, think and behave differently to the way that we do. In the next training program in this series, we'll take this science and this information on behavior and start to learn about how we can scientifically map ourselves and use this information to help us choose the types of careers that we will be more likely to enjoy and succeed in. We can even use this information to be able to advance some key skills in areas like selling, negotiating, managing and leading. It's often said that great leadership comes from knowing yourself, and so I hope that this starter program has helped you get a basic level of the science of behavior and the potential that exists when we start to apply this to our understanding of ourselves and others. Great. So I hope you'll be joining me again very soon in our next training to build on this module on the science of behavior. Please click like and share, and of course subscribe if you want to be the first to receive the notification of our next program, or even go to our website at www.freedomlearning.net, where you can schedule live training sessions with me if you'd like to. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Cheers.